Today, 1.2 million people a year are admitted to A&E due to overconsumption of alcohol. This number has doubled in the last 8 years. Today, the cheapest alcohol on the market you can find is 17p per unit. This means the average person can get drunk with a pound coin. This is partially because since 1980, prices of alcohol have fallen 44%. Over the same period, cirrhosis of the liver has risen tenfold. Moreover, in 2010, 6,317 people died due to alcohol-created liver problems. Liver disease has now increased by 25% in under 10 years. And the trend that 1 out of every 4 people, or aged between 16 and 24, who die due to alcohol-related problems. Yet this hurts much more than just an individual. In 2009, 26% of people said that drunken disorder is a major social issue where they live. In 2010, 45% of violent crimes, 37% of domestic violence cases, and in 33% of child abuse cases, the perpetrators were drunk. Last year, 9,700 people were injured or killed due to drink driving. And alcohol-fueled crime cost £13 billion, costing the UK in total roughly £25 billion in social costs.
First of all, we'd like to make it clear that we don't believe Britain's current alcohol misuse is acceptable, and we didn't really need a barrage of statistics to tell us that. However, we don't believe that minimum unit pricing would be good for Britain. I would first like to paint you 2 pictures. A group of friends gather around a dining table, eating a hearty meal, a bottle of wine being passed around, and conversation and wine flows as they catch up on the week's events. After a while, the bottle is finished, as is the meal, and they head to bed feeling happy and secure. A man loses his job. There's no money to support his family, so he turns to the benefit system to feed them. With his self-esteem shattered, a sense of helplessness sets in. He turns to his only friend, Jack Daniels. As the first scene illustrates, alcohol can be enjoyed responsibly. A minimum unit price would unfairly punish responsible drinkers. And for the alcoholic, would reducing the price give him the motivation he needs? No, it would simply exacerbate his problems. This is all the bad aspects of paternalism. The government has no right to dictate people's lives. We have freedom as an individual, and if an individual wants to do something, that's their right. If an individual does something that damages others, then they should be subject to penalties according to laws and not restrained by a nannying state.
If it will really hurt the people on the breadline the most, then why is it that those who are poorest actively ask for minimum alcohol pricing the most? I mean, in Springburn, Glasgow, that has the lowest life expectancy of anywhere in the UK, yet it is the place where the community leaders demanded minimum alcohol pricing the most. There is a proven trend showing that if cheap alcohol is made more expensive, people will drink less of it. A University of Florida study of over 30 countries showed an average of a 10% price rise led to a 4.6% drop in consumption. And furthermore, unlike what the opposition have said, minimum alcohol pricing is the only measure that lessens the burden on the average moderate drinker, but still tackles the problem that they have agreed with us exists. But furthermore, I think what we have to say is the state has to do this, and it has to combat excessive alcohol consumption, because not to do so would be a dereliction of the social contract. British society, since the modern era, has been run on the principle that individuals cede some personal autonomy to the state in exchange for the welfare it provides. The welfare state is the culmination of this principle. It was created to tackle the 5 giants of poverty, I think the squalor, want, ignorance, idleness and disease. In order for it to do so, it requires the tacit consent of the people to cede some personal autonomy and to conduct themselves in a responsible manner.
During the 18th century's Industrial Revolution, the amount of gin consumed rose from 500,000 to a staggering 55 million gallons. So why the increase? Essentially, gin became the escape for the masses living in deprivation and suffering extensive hours in factories. For centuries, humans have misused alcohol in an attempt to achieve a temporary escape from their daily anxieties and hardships. This policy oversimplifies Britain's complex relationship with alcohol. It assumes that ultimately people destroy not only their lives, but the lives of those around them simply because alcohol is cheap. It assumes the shocking high rates of alcohol misuse are unrelated to the general feeling of disenfranchisement, despair, and downright lack of aspiration felt by many people today from factors such as unemployment. Are we expected to believe that a simple solution to Britain's complex and entrenched problem of alcohol exists through financially punishing those who drink, and by ultimately making alcohol prohibitively expensive, without even targeting the cause of the problem?
The idea, I think, seems to be underpinning your case is that we should think of alcohol as an addictive drug or as a poison. Is that essentially what you're arguing? That it's really a substance which has absolutely nothing to recommend it, and basically that we should view with trepidation and a high degree of fear?
Aaron, you gave a lot of sort of powerful statistics and factoids, but I'd be interested to understand where your arguments stop and how they relate to other things that people do which are unhealthy. Where are you going to draw the line?
You made quite a strong argument about the importance of collective responsibility, and that we cede authority to the state in response to the welfare. I'm just interested to know where you see the limits in that ceding to the state. Are there limits? We saw only yesterday the London Port authorities stop people swimming in the Thames because it might damage somebody's health. So what sort of limits do you see in place?
We're advocating minimum alcohol pricing because we think it's commensurate with the level of the problems which alcohol is causing. Preserving the principle of choice, as long as that doesn't harm another person. So the thing with minimum alcohol pricing is that someone can still go out and buy it. We're just making it the conditions around that less favourable.
So alcohol causes £13 billion worth of crime to happen a year, whereas someone being fat doesn't. That's where I draw the line. It's the extent of the social cost is so much greater in this case.
No, we don't think alcohol is some kind of like evil drink. Alcohol is perfectly fun, and I'm sure most people in this room drink alcohol and find it fun. It's just about being responsible.
If it's the case that we have an epidemic of alcohol-related crime and A&E admissions, and if it is the case that minimum pricing would be one of the measures that would significantly reduce that, is it really much of a price to pay for the responsible drinker to pay a bit more?
I'm quite interested in this argument that somehow the rights of the minority are greater than that of the majority. What is the balance again between those two? How bad does a minority have to be before you're prepared to actually restrict their rights to provide greater safety security to the majority?
You started off by conceding a fair bit of ground, I think, in arguing that you think that there is a big problem with drunkenness. And through the course of your talks, you described drunkenness in a very unfavourable light, inherently associated with poverty, social problems, in your case of the person who likes Jack Daniels. So really I wanted to ask you the same question as the other side. Do you think that there are any merits to drunkenness? Do you think there can be a happy drunk? Or are all drunks unhappy, destitute, unemployed people?
There's nothing wrong with drinking responsibly, and that was kind of what I tried to outline in my opening speech.
So drunkenness can be responsible?
It's the minority that come along and drink for the sake of drinking and do it every weekend, going out to get smashed and etc., that are causing the problem.
We don't think there is a limit where the majority can take away the rights of the minority. We think that rights should only be ceded to government when we either gain more freedoms as a result or when the safety of other people is in danger. And that is not something that you can hold alcohol directly responsible for. You can say someone got drunk and committed a crime whilst they were drunk. Fundamentally, they still know what they're doing when they're drunk. And we don't think that the alcohol should be held responsible for that. We think the individual should be held responsible for that under the law.
I feel that I need to challenge this consensus which was established right from the very beginning, that we have a serious alcohol problem. We don't. If we measure against 1945, for example, we were just coming out of a huge recession and 2 world wars, and then we're the lowest level of consumption in Britain that we'd ever seen. We're drinking much less than we were in 1914, only slightly more than they were in about the late 1980s, and we're actually drinking less than in 2002, and we drink less than the French, the Italians, the Germans, and most other European countries. So I think it's just that we feel bad about ourselves, and what we need to do is, if we stop blaming ourselves so harshly for this problem, I think we'll all end up, if you forgive me, in better spirits.
I kind of want to press the rich-poor divide, because I think that the proposition tried to evade it by saying it didn't exist, by saying somehow the poor were fine with this. But it does exist. I think that's quite undeniable. So, I mean, John Stuart Mill said that any measures that imply economic sanctions for certain, or economic deterrence for certain activities assumes a civilization that treats the labouring classes as savages and children. So I was wondering whether you think that the working classes need a sort of a more increased paternalism that somehow the ruling classes don't need, and whether is that simply an elitist opinion?
On liberty, the essay that John Stuart Mill wrote has a very interesting part of it in chapter 5. It says that the people are excluded from the sort of harm principle, which is, I think, what you're kind of getting at, if they were mentally incapable or otherwise ill or diseased. We are, in effect, taking that principle and extending it further. Of course, we would love it if, in an ideal world, everyone made exactly the right choices. But when people have shown consistently that they're not making the right choices, they're not capable of making the right choices, then the state has to come in and create an environment when they can make the right choices.
To the proposition, you've still not fully addressed, I think, whether raising the economic cost of something can solve a deeply rooted social problem that we have.
You spoke about the huge problem and the huge costs that the NHS is burdened with for alcohol and the sort of courts and things from alcohol-related crime. But when you're talking about obesity and things that have been raised before, this is equal, if not more than that, and you haven't really been coherent as to how far this extends and as to why I don't really have a right to go and get pissed and lie down in the street.
If people in poor areas of Scotland don't like cheap alcohol, why do they need a law to stop them buying it? Isn't it rather the case not that this is experts and self-appointed community leaders, you're not elected by anyone, deciding they know what's best for other people? Otherwise, if they just didn't like cheap alcohol, there'd be no market for cheap alcohol, and you wouldn't have a problem with it. So shouldn't you be unashamed in saying, actually, you are taking a paternalistic line? You can't just leave it to people to make their own choices because they make the wrong choices. It seems to me that's the only way the argument makes sense. And then briefly to the other side, so you painted a nice picture of a group of friends sharing a single bottle of wine over dinner and then going to bed, which is nice, but I'd suggest perhaps not an entirely representative picture of how most people in Britain drink. I think there's good evidence to believe that it's not just about chronic alcoholics and the desperately poor people lying in gutters, but most people in Britain who drink regularly do probably drink considerably more than the optimum amount for their health. And so there's a case to be said, in that case, shouldn't we take action? And even if it's only symbolic, by saying alcohol needs to have a minimum price, marked out as not just a normal product, but something to take seriously, that will give us all a collective jolt.
Isn't it true that over the past sort of 50 years, as the state has taken greater responsibility for the actions of individuals, those individuals have become less responsible themselves, and this is why we lead to the problem that we're in now? And basically, my question would be, should the state take on the responsibility of individuals?
I find, for both sides, I find all, the prim and proper posturing about, the sort of dark fantasy of, the drunks, just really weird. We're having a debate about a group of people who you have made up as being, the standard bad guys. We need people to, to have this debate in, the real world. We need, people to personally connect and understand, how we use alcohol.
You admitted that alcohol minimum pricing wasn't a silver bullet, and that you kind of implied that it was going to be a supplement. It's quite an expensive supplement, I've got to say. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and it's distracting us from the real problems. In British Columbia, where they did try it out, it supposedly reduced alcohol consumption by 3.8% over a period of 20 years. And even that's mostly because of the recession. I doubt it's anything to do with minimum pricing. What actually does work is providing people with better economic opportunities, better education, better access to health. And I think you're just being like ostriches, burying your head in sand and being petty about this. There are real problems out there, and alcohol minimum pricing won't solve it.
If I'm being asked to where this principle extends, I'm sorry if I haven't covered this clearly enough, but I refuse to draw a line in the sand and say this is when we should intervene and this is where we shouldn't, because it's such a complex process. We have to weigh up the cost to our freedoms and the cost to our civil liberties with the cost of not intervening. And it's a complex process, and we have to do it every single time. In terms of harm, I would probably say we have two areas. We have harm to the individual and harm to the rest of society. And so I think we weigh up that harm with the harm caused by taking away freedom. But it's not simple, it's incredibly complex, and so many of our problems stem from it.
The cost to the state of implementing minimum unit pricing is estimated at $2 billion. And the estimated savings to wider society, including crime, the cost of the NHS, come in at around 200 million, which means we would be spending 1.8 billion on a policy which is not very effective.
The media has suddenly become obsessed with the amount of binge drinking in this country, and it's putting pressure on the top people in our society to say, look, we need to do something about it, when in fact it hasn't risen that much. In fact, it's decreased 13% since 2004. And I'd just like to say we don't need a short-term policy to affect this when we've got such long-term policies, such as the Know Your Limits policy, which is taking effect now. It might have taken a little bit longer, but it is working, and the long-term policies are what matter rather than a short-term policy which will unfairly and unjustly penalise parts of society.
The reason why we support minimum alcohol pricing is because it works. And no, it isn't the state showing the ultimate patriarchy it's the state fulfilling its duty of care towards the people. And if it can't do that, I don't know what society we live in.